They plowed my family's farm to make way for their ostentatious community garden, never knowing I had records in hand that I owned the whole county. What would you do if you found the ultimate magic to make your obnoxious HOA neighbors contribute? Comment below where you're viewing, for the thud of a car door slamming woke me up out of my afternoon siesta. On the porch, I opened my eyes to find a woman in a sharp white pantsuit storming up my gravel driveway, her heels sinking into the gravel slightly with each resolute step. My old farm dog, Bruno, gave a half-hearted woof before curling back up down. "Excuse me, you there," she shouted, holding a bright yellow slip of paper. "Are you the owner of this property?" I slowly got to my feet, flexing my back after a long morning of repairing irrigation pipes. "Yes, ma'am, James Miller. My family owns this farm for 3 generations. How may I assist you?" She sized me up, clearly not impressed by my mud-stained jeans and work boots. "I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. This is an official notice. A violation." She pushed the paper towards me. I had taken it, really perplexed. My 600 acres of farmland had existed long before the highfalutin new Sunny Meadows development had risen up on the other side of the road. "Last year violation, ma'am. I am not one of your HOA." Karen's immaculately lined lips curled into what I suppose she intended as a smile. "Your eyes saw a barn is openly visible from a number of our premium view properties. It's lowering our property values by an estimated 15%. I looked over my grandfather's barn. Sure, the red paint was peeling in places, but it remained solid and performed its function just well enough. This barn has been here since 1937. And now we're in 2025. Mr. Miller, things change. We're requiring it to be painted or taken down in 30 days. She gestured the paper I was holding. It's all laid out there along with a fine that could be imposed. I could feel my anger rising, but maintained even tone. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Your HOA regulations don't pertain to my property." Karen's expression became cold. "We'll see about that. By the way, what exactly do you have growing over there?" She indicated toward my east field where my wheat was just beginning to sprout. "Winter wheat, same as ever." She jotted something on her phone. "Intriguing. The board will be interested in learning about this." Without another word, she spun and click-clack walked back to her bright SUV. I watched her pull away, then glanced down at the violation notice. It had a stamp that looked official and promised a $200 per day fine. At the bottom was a sticky note that said, "We need to talk about the east section. Call me Kay." I crumpled the paper and stuffed it into my pocket. These city people migrating out to the edge of town always believed they could push us farmers around. I really had work to do that night. While I was cooking supper, my phone rang. It was Rick Thompson, my buddy since childhood, who is now the county clerk. "Jimmy, you sit down." Rick's voice was tense. "What's wrong? Snake in your office again?" I laughed, recalling when a garden snake had caused Rick to jump onto his desk. "I wish." Listen, something strange just occurred. Karen Whitfield from that new subdivision came in with some papers concerning your east field she was filing. "Allows I quit stirring my chili. Allows for what a community garden, pool, and tennis courts." "Jimmy, she's asserting that part of your land belongs to their development. Says it was never surveyed properly when your grandfather purchased the adjacent parcels." "That's absurd. I have the deeds in my file cabinet right here." Well, she had papers too. Something doesn't seem right. But they were stamped and filed properly. They're going to begin clearing land tomorrow morning. I almost dropped the phone. "Tomorrow they can't just bulldoze my wheat. I've almost got 50 acres sown there." I attempted to lag behind, but she had all the right signatures. "Something's not right, Jimmy. You better locate those deeds tonight." After hanging up, I dashed my office, truly a corner of the living room where I stored the farm documents. I took out the metal filing cabinet my dad had organized so well before he passed. My fingers trembled slightly as I browsed through the folders. There it was, the original deed in 1937 and the extra parcels my granddad had bought in the 40s and 50s. As I laid them out on the kitchen table, reading the property lines, all seemed to be in place just as it had been for decades. The east field was obviously within our bounds. But then I saw something. The most recent survey, conducted only 5 years ago, when I thought I would sell a little piece, but ended up not selling, indicated a small difference in the eastern boundary. Nothing significant, just roughly 15-foot difference from the initial survey I had overlooked at the time, deeming it just more precise model. Contemporary machinery. Might Karen somehow have utilized this minute difference to steal more of my land? I phoned Rick back, but it went directly to voicemail. Then I tried the sheriff's office. Sheriff Davis speaking. Sheriff, it's James Miller out at Miller Farm. I believe someone is going to illegally bulldoze some of my wheat field tomorrow morning. There was a momentary silence. Jimmy, yeah, I had a call about that today. Sounds like there's some issue of property line with that new development. It's not an issue, Sheriff. They're attempting to take my land now. Jimmy, don't go around making accusations. Tell you what, I'll go out tomorrow morning and ensure all is within an adjunct of the law before any machinery is moved. I thanked him and placed the phone down. A little less anxious. Sheriff Davis and my dad had attended school together. He'd see that things were done fairly. As the sun went down over my fields, I sat on my porch observing the lights turning on in the large houses down the road. What was Karen ultimately after the east field wasn't even visible from their construction. Then it dawned on me water rights my land held access to Carson Creek that flowed to the back of my property. The development had been experiencing water pressure issues all summer long. I'd heard grumblings at the general store where they attempting access to the creek. I couldn't sleep that evening. Instead, I dug into more documents, uncovering documents my father and grandfather had kept. About 3 a.m., I discovered something interesting and saw a 1962 county map on which my family did not own just this farm, but had once owned most of the land in the 30-30M circle, including where Sunny Meadows now stood. We'd sold parcels off through the years as farming grew less profitable, but I wonder what other rights we may still have: water rights, mineral rights, access easements. Just before dawn, I fell asleep at the kitchen table amidst papers. A rumble of heavy machinery awakened me. I dashed naked outside to behold 3 bulldozers coming down the access road towards my east field. Karen drove her SUV out front, and behind the bulldozers were a few other vehicles with the Sunny Meadows HOA logo. Where was Sheriff Davis? I reached my phone to call him again, but before I could call, the first bulldozer smashed through my fence line and into my wheat field. The noise of engines shook me awake at 5:30 a.m. Not tractors, these were bigger, noisy machines. I leaped out of bed, heart pounding, and put on my boots. Something was terribly amiss. I sprinted outside in my pajamas to see 3 huge yellow bulldozers destroying my wheat field. The golden stalks my family had lovingly sown were being torn from the earth and shoved into heaps like garbage. My stomach fell. Those wheat plants were meant to feed hundreds of people. Hey, stop. I yelled, running towards them, waving my arms. The operators couldn't hear me above the roaring engines. Then I saw them. Karen Whitfield and 5 others wearing identical blue Sunny Meadows HOA polo shirts gathered beside a white SUV on the border of my property. They were all drinking coffee from identical travel mugs, gazing at the devastation. As if it were some sort of entertaining morning show, I rushed over mud staining my pajama bottoms. What in the world do you think you're doing? This is my property. Karen slowly, as if she were shocked to find me on my property, her immaculate blonde bob unmoving as she cocked her head. Good morning, she said in a sugary tone, as if we were encountering for coffee. We're finally dealing with the neighborhood eyesore problem. The board acted unanimously. I gestured toward the bulldozers. Stop it right now. They're my crops. Karen exhaled like I was a kid who didn't know the difference between addition and subtraction. Really, according to county records, this portion was never duly registered to your family. It's been slated as community land for decades. She extracted a folder from her designer purse and unfolded it to reveal a property map with red marker lines drawn on it. My land had been halved. That's impossible. I told him my grandfather purchased this whole 600 acres back in 1937. I have the deeds. Well, here are the official records. Karen smiled, snapping the folder shut. Before I could actually take a look, we're building something beautiful here, community watchman, with raised beds, a meditation labyrinth, and a koi pond. Property values will increase at least 8% once this eyesore is removed. The man sitting next to her, who I knew as Doug Wilson from the neighborhood marketing brochures, nodded enthusiastically. We've already sold sponsorship benches to 15 families. Construction begins next week. I grabbed my phone in trembling hands and dialed the sheriff's office. As it rang, I stood aghast as the bulldozers dig deeper into my field, uprooting more of my crops. Every second, you can't do this, I yelled over the din at Karen. This is theft and destruction of private property. It's progress, she retorted, turning to speak to a woman scribbling on an iPad. They all laughed. Sheriff Davis finally picked up on the 4th ring, and I nervously explained the circumstances are uprooting my crops as we speak. I need deputies there now. There was silence on the line for a moment. I know you're angry, the sheriff replied cautiously, but as it stands in the system, This is looking like a civil dispute over property. We can't respond without a court order with their trespassing and damaging my property. From what I see in the record, Sheriff Davis drawled slowly the boundaries of property are. Not defined, I'd recommend you call your attorney. Something about. His reluctance made my flesh crawl. Sheriff Davis had known my family for years. Why was it now treating us like strangers? I'll stop by later to take a report, he added, and hung up before I could protest. When I glanced up at my phone, Karen was regarding me with a smug smile. She knew perfectly well how that conversation had proceeded. Everything all right, she asked in an innocent tone. The sheriff is on his way, I fibbed, trying to sound assured. Karen's smile did not shift. Great. He can examine our permits. She thrust a pile of official-looking papers at me. All endorsed by the county last month. We attempted to inform you of this at the neighborhood meeting, but you never come, do you? Because I don't reside in your neighborhood, I yelled as my face grew hot. I've lived on this farm my whole life. My grandfather constructed that barred himself in 1932, and it's been dragging down property values ever since, reported Doug, glancing at his watch. We have another meeting at 9. Will you be all right here, Karen? Fine as anything, she told him as the other board members drove off. Karen looked back at me. See, change is hard, but progress is certain. The suburbs are expanding, and really farming does not fit the community vision anymore. I stood in shocked silence as a bulldoze tore through the irrigation system my dad had put in 30 years prior. Pipes burst, spewing water into the air. That's all for today. Karen phoned the operators, glancing at her watch. We'll try tomorrow. The bulldozers retreated, leaving deep grooves in my desecrated field. 6 acres of wheat, almost a fifth of my year's pay, was utterly levied. This isn't finished, I exclaimed, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. Karen put a hand on my shoulder. I recoiled. It really is, she said, but we're willing to act in good faith. If you relinquish the balance of contested land voluntarily, we won't charge you for today's land clearing services. She turned and headed for her car, stopping to oversee as workers pounded into my ground massive sign, future home of Sunny Meadows Community Gardens and Wellness Center. As Karen drove off, I saw Rick Thompson's truck tearing down my driveway. He leapt out, face white with shock. I just heard. I got here as fast as I could, he said, looking at the devastation. This is crazy. How did they manage to get permits for something like this? Someone at the county office assisted them, I said, a chilling realization settling in my stomach. But who would do that? And why? Rick shook his head. I have no idea. But there's another thing. On my way here, I saw surveyors at your north field. They had Sunny Meadows logo on their truck. My blood ran cold. They're not finishing with just this field. We have to determine how they forged those property records. Rick told me this isn't about your farm anymore. If they're able to do this to you, they could do it to anyone. I finished gazing at the wrecked field of my home. I immediately headed to my grandfather's old study behind a painting of our farm. There was a small safe, if I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the original property documents, deed surveys, and maps dating back to when my great-grandfather first settled this county. What I discovered made my hands shake with both fury and determination, Karen. And the HOA had no idea who they were really messing with, and by tomorrow at this time, they'd be sorry they ever stepped foot on my property. I couldn't sleep last night. The vision of bulldozers ripping up my wheat field kept running through my brain. At dawn, I dressed and phoned Rick. I need all the documents on the Oak Ridge Estates development. I informed him, birth certificates, the building permits, everything. It would take weeks, Rick said. I need it by noon 3 hours later. I was knee-deep in county records at Rick's office. My coffee was cold, but I barely noticed my hands trembled as I flipped through dusty folders from the 1920s, found something Rick called from his computer, the original land survey from when your great-grandfather parsed out the county. And look who signed off on it. The signature at the bottom made my heart race. Judge William Whitfield, Karen's great-great-grandfather. Rick confirmed he knew exactly where the property lines were. Supposedly my phone buzzed with a text the HOA was holding an emergency meeting tonight to talk to me about phase 2 of their community project. More of my land was in jeopardy back home. I pulled a heavy trunk out of my attic. It was packed with my grandfather's papers inside. I discovered a leather folder with gold lettering, county water rights. Not I read it 3 times to be certain. The water lines which supplied the whole Oak Ridge estates cut directly across my property. My family had given an easement with tight restrictions. My hands trembled as I called my old college roommate Sandra, now a lawyer in the city. How quick can you arrive? Asked what the problem is, she replied, I'm going to war with 200 upset homeowners. The Sunny Meadows HOA meeting room was filled when I arrived that night. I saw Karen standing up front in a stylish blue blazer with the HOA emblem, her blonde hair stylishly blown. She tapped impatiently at her manicured nails, waiting for all to get settled. I slipped into the back row, unnoticed. Nobody paid attention to me, as you can see from these. Lovely renderings, Karen explained, gesturing to brightly colored. Posters phase 2 will transform another 10 acres of that horrid land on our new tennis complex and hiking trails. A crowd politely applauded. A man in golf attire rose to his feet. What about the farmer who resides there? Will he not protest? Karen waved her hand in dismissal. Our legal counsel assured us that land had been inappropriately registered many decades ago. It is rightfully ours now. My blood was boiling, but I kept my expression serene. I waited for the appropriate opportunity. With the tennis complex, our property values should rise by at least 15%, Karen went on, smiling. We've already secured the bulldozers on next Monday. When she at last opened the floor for feedback, I walked slowly to the microphone. The room went silent, with people turning around to stare at me. Good evening. I stated I'm the farmer whose property you bulldozed yesterday and whose property you're set to acquire on Monday. Karen smile hardened. Sir, this is an exclusive HOA meeting. Prior to you proceeding with your proposals, I said coolly I'd like to present myself properly. My name's James Miller. My great-grandfather established this county in 1901. Our family has cultivated here for more a century. I opened my folder and put my first document on the projector. It was a yellowed map of the original county divisions. This is the original land survey signed by Judge William Whitfield in 1922. Does that name ring a bell? Karen, her face flushed. Some board members spoke in hushed tones. Your great-grandfather personally confirmed our property lines. I went on, which makes it interesting that you say my land was inadvisedly registered. I moved on to the next document. Our family trust still retains the mineral and water rights to all land within a 30 m radius, including underneath your homes. The crowd grumbled uneasily. That's just not possible. Karen snapped. Our development is all lawful. I spent a day with county officials. I interrupted. My voice remains. Even so, it appears your HOA has been operating illegally without proper authorization. For years, your water service passes through my land on easements that can be withdrawn with 30 days notice. An older man stood up. Are you cutting off our water? I'm stating facts. I replied like it's a fact that your construction was founded on a conditional use agreement which mandates having a 200-acre farm buffer zone, the same land that you bulldozed yesterday and intended to bulldoze Monday. Karen approached. Her face red. We have records. Forged records. Came a voice from the door. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Davis enter, followed by Rick and 3 county officials. Rick had a large cardboard box marked evidence. This meeting is now a part of an official county investigation, the sheriff declared. We have good reason to suspect property records were intentionally forged. Chaos broke out. Homeowners cried questions. Karen attempted to take control again, but was overpowered by them. The vice president of the HOA, a tall guy named Doug, took the microphone. This is absurd. We went through every legal procedure. Sandra stood forward behind the sheriff. Then you won't mind clarifying why the permit applications for your community garden proposal were dated back and signed by a county clerk who has been retired for 3 years. Gasps. All eyes were on Karen, who was texting wildly on her phone. Or why Sandra continued. The maps of property that were submitted to the county don't align with the official surveys of any year after 1937. A woman with an infant stood up. Are we going to lose our homes over this? That's not my intention, I said, staring at her. But the bulldozing the land of my family must end, and those responsible held accountable. Karen thrust into the crowd towards the door. Sheriff Davis nodded to a deputy who stepped in front of the doorway. Mrs. Whitfield, the sheriff informed us that we would need you to remain for questioning. I compiled my papers, observing as terrified homeowners encircled board members, seeking explanations. This was no longer about my property. These individuals had been deceived too, and I headed for the door. Doug caught my arm. You don't know who you're dealing with, he growled. Karen's husband is a state senator. This little trick will cost you everything. I removed his hand. I'm not the one who bulldozed someone else's property based on fake papers in the air. Besides, the night air was cool against my skin. I leaned against my truck, feeling suddenly tired. This victory would prove to be short-lived. Karen had money and influence. The battle was only just starting, and she would return stronger than ever. My phone rang. It was Rick. You must return to your farm immediately. He stated his tone urgent. Something is going on at your house. I leapt into my truck and raced home, my heart racing as I drove over the hill that overlooked my property. I could see flashing lights, fire trucks, police cars, and in the distance, orange flames licking up the side of my century-old barn. They'd hit back faster than I thought. I woke up to the hum of a drone flying overhead. Jumping out of bed, I ran to the window and grabbed my binoculars just in time to see Karen herself piloting from the border of my property. She was surveying more of my land for 3 consecutive weeks after the county meeting. The Sunny Meadows HOA had been coming at me from all directions. They'd frozen me out of local businesses. The owner of the grocery store suddenly couldn't order my favorite coffee. The hardware store said they didn't have the tractor parts one required. I wasn't going to let them get the best of me, not after what they did to my wheat field. When I pulled into town that morning, people looked at me. A poster was advertised on the community board, emergency home meeting, fixing the farmland menace. My farm, where I raised crops that fed half the county, was now labeled as a menace. Don't let it phase you, said Rick, handing me a coffee as I walked into his office at the county building. I've been rummaging through old records all night. You won't believe what I discovered. He unrolled a yellowed map on his desk. It indicated property lines dating from 1937, with my grandfather's signature in the corner of it. Based on this, Rick said, pointing to fine print at the bottom, your grandfather had a special provision when he sold the original plots where Oak Ridge Estates is located. No development can change the natural water shed. The second they bulldoze your field, they broke that provision. My phone rang. It was Maria Gonzalez, an Oak resident I had met at the farmer's market. They've shut off our water, she said in a panic. The HOA is alleging contamination from your farm. We have elderly and children, and no water. That's impossible. I told her your water is provided by the county supply, not according to the notice on our doors. It says that we now have to purchase bottled water at the HOA office at $20 a gallon until this farm contamination is fixed. I slammed the phone down. My blood was boiling. Karen wasn't attacking me anymore. She was using me as an excuse to profit off her own neighbors. When I arrived home, I found surveyors on another part of my property. Doug Wilson, the new HOA president, stood with arms crossed. Karen had been ousted, but was obviously still calling the shots. You're trespassing, I said quietly. We have new documentation, Doug asserted, flanked by 2 security guards with Sunny Meadows patches. This parcel was rezoned in 1997. It belongs to the community. Now I looked at their faces. These were not professional surveyors. These were HOA board members impersonating. In order to be officials, I'll have you precisely 1 minute to leave my property, I said. Or what? Doug smiled. Your threats were taped at the meeting. The sheriff's on our side. Now, little did they realize that I've been taping too. Every word, every threat they'd issued that evening. The local news van drove up to my farm. I called in a favor from an old buddy of mine, who is now a reporter. We're looking into allegations that the Meadows HOA has shut off water to its own home, she said on camera, and allegations of illegal land seizure. I led her to the bulldoze field, the phony surveyor stakes, and most incriminating of all, the water bills residents have been paying versus actual county rates. The piece ran at 6 p.m. By 7, my phone was ringing constantly. Oak residents were enraged, not at me, but against Karen and the HOA. The next morning, I observed from my kitchen window as county water trucks rolled up to Oak Ridge Estate. Rick had organized emergency water delivery to the families caught out by the HOA scam. Then something odd occurred. A moving truck drove up to Karen's residence where they were taking us. Had our pressure finally paid, my celebration was short-lived. That day, I was served notice that the HOA had sued me for environmental damage and lowering property values. My farm was allegedly responsible. They demanded $2 million in damages plus the immediate taking of all of my land. I sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling, as I read the suit. This was more than about a community garden. Now Karen and her friends wanted everything. That is when I saw something strange about the suit. Paperwork. That law firm and attorney was Whitfield Holdings, LLC, Karen's own business. She wasn't simply the president of the HOA. She was financially benefiting from this battle. I contacted Rick right away. I need to see all property sales in Oak Estates of the previous 5 years. What we uncovered left us dumbfounded. Karen and 3 board members had been purchasing homes all around Oak at sub-market rates. Whenever a homeowner was breaking HOA regulations, they'd set the regulations specifically in place to drive people out and the community garden. It wasn't about spiting me. The land, a bulldoze, sat on top of a natural spring, the most valuable source of water in our drought county. I held an emergency town meeting at the county courthouse. Every resident of Oak Estates showed up along with farmers and townsfolk from all over the county standing before them. I laid it all out: the water price, gouging the property scheme, and most importantly, the water rights grab. Your HOA has been overcharging you triple the regular water rates for years, I explained, showing their bills against county rates. They insisted it was county fees, but that money directly funds board members' companies. I projected the documents on the wall, evidencing the money trail, Karen. And Doug attempted to shout me down, but the evidence was too evident. There's more. I continued, pointing at the property map. The actual property lines indicate that your garages constructed 5 years ago actually occupy my land. I've never complained because I believe in being neighborly. The room exploded. Homeowners turned on Karen and Doug. Demands and the grand deception of all. I explained when the yelling subsided is that this is about property values or community gardens. It's about this. I superimposed an underground water survey map. They desire the spring under my field in our county. Whoever owns water owns everything. Karen's face turned white. She had not known that I had access to the geological surveys. As the meeting erupted into shouting anger, Sheriff Davis finally stood up on the evidence presented. I'm opening an official investigation into the Sunny Meadows HOA board. Karen rushed for the door, but 2 deputies stood in her way. I locked eyes with Rick across the room and nodded minutely. The trap had been sprung. Now it was time to spring it shut. But as I headed to my truck that evening, I saw a figure lurking in the shadows. This battle wasn't done. Yet it was far, far worse to come. The courtroom became hushed as the judge slammed his gavel. Amidst the evidence, I find the Sunny Meadows HOA board guilty of document forgery and unlawful land confiscation. Karen's face turned scarlet as she leapt up. This is preposterous. Do you have any idea who my husband is? The judge cut her off. Mrs. Whitfield, you're being charged with a crime and paying a $50,000 fine. One more word, and I'll include contempt of court. Walking out, I was ambushed by news crews. My tale had gone viral overnight. How does it feel to be a winner against the HOA that attempted to steal your family farm? A reporter asked. This isn't about me. I replied, it's for every homeowner they've intimidated with phony rules and secret charges. A week later, flyers showed up in every oaked mailbox and exposing Karen's clandestine luxury condo buys with HOA money by night. Furious neighbors were calling for a new board election. The new HOA president, Maria, came to my door. The following day, we uncovered the truth about the water bill scam. We want to get right. 3 months later, I witnessed neighborhood children planting sunflowers along the property line of fence come alive. We designed together. Karen passed by in her moving van, scowling as her home sold for half its worth. Your grandfather would be so proud, Rick said, standing next to me. Didn't only save the farm, you showed a whole community what it is to be real neighbors.